Okay, let's see if... I hope people can hear me. Okay, it says that my mic is reading. That's good. So let's wait till people get online. Hello, the two of you watching. That's awesome. Okay, let me go. Shut my door. Hi. Okay, do you want to join? Okay, you can join. So you might be wondering why I don't have my camera on. One is a just random, like, not, for some reason, like, every time I turn on OBS is a bit of a gamble. So I don't always have my camera on for some reason. The other reason is that the tree outside of my window has lost all of its leaves, and when the sun comes shining in, you would just see like a very pasty glow hitting my face, or a very bright glow hitting my face and on my pasty self. You know, you wouldn't see anything but like washed out white. So, you know, that is why I am not streaming my video, but it probably makes it will probably make my bandwidth a little bit better. So let me see. I'll just double check in the chat if everybody can hear me by typing, can you all hear me? Here we go. So, yeah, today, what we are going to OBS is, okay, so I guess you can hear me because somebody just commented on my comment about OBS. So, hello. So, today what we're going to talk about is like an overview of what happens to these games. And like we've talked about a few things, like what this field of game development is like, what this sector of game development is like. So, you know, this is the lecture though where I really talk about, you know, when you make a game of this sort, what happens to it. So the also the case study, by the way, this week, there's not really, because this is sort of like a meta discussion. Yeah, you got the Pikmin amiibo. My son is here and he's playing with the Pikmin amiibo. Because because this is like a meta discussion, the game here, like this week for the case study, is more for fun than anything. But it is still, I think, a fun, snarky game about the concept of game studies. So go check it out. you'll get it's like actually really good illustrations of like topics from game studies, and if you play it and you're like, what do any of these mean, feel free to reach out on Discord because I'm happy to explain them. And if you get them explained to you, then you'll understand what they are too. So this is kind of a meta discussion, and the purpose of this is, think about if we were in like the class next semester game prototyping, where the focus is really on more generalized, fun-driven, like commercial and fun-driven game development, we would be making games that you might then like put on itch and try to maybe even like sell for money, or that you might get a LLC together and work with some people or something like that. There are or maybe you even work up to like launching your game on Steam. And that's not to say you can't do any of those things with transformational games, but the thing with transformational games is that there are different places that you post these things beyond, or these games end up in different places beyond just the normal marketplaces that you might be used to. Sometimes they are instead of the normal marketplaces, but sometimes they're actually in addition to the normal marketplaces. And this is something that I've talked with a lot of colleagues of mine who are professors who make games, and a friend of mine said, well, shouldn't there be like something that are professor games, that are like games that are commercial but made for academic research? And I think for a while there, such games might have been considered mostly serious and transformational games, because that is what the academic research was. But now I think if you're distinguishing them from serious games, and I'm talking about games like Walden by Tracy Fullerton or Bruckle by Bob DeShooter down at Miami of Ohio, they are games that both have some sort of, or like even my game La Mancha, they have some sort of transformational or educational aspect to them, but they are fun. They are sold as commercial products rather than fully for research. Yeah. And there's an element of this where you can really have your cake and eat it too. You can make a game, but maybe part of that game's novelty is its transformational aspect. And it's not that you're making it, again, sort of like the chocolate-covered broccoli badly gamified thing. You're trying to make something a little more Oregon Trail-ish, where like you have fun, but you walk away with something. So we can talk about some of these things. I hope to get your questions and perspective on them. I know last week, for example, everybody was like, well, this is what I normally think of when I think of educational games, is the bad chocolate-covered broccoli. So hopefully today we can, dispense with some of that and help you see what avenues really are out there. So, so today what we're going to talk about is the research involved in transformational games and who does it. We're also going to talk about how games are released and what happens to this research. Now, this is a class. It's different from other classes in that you have to, from a assignment perspective, you have to write a paper and then make a game from what you learn in the paper. But that paper is not busy work. It's you laying the groundwork for your game. And this is something I hope you walk away with. Because I think, the way that folks assume that game making happens, again, is like you come up with an idea and then you just start like hammering the game out. Where, in reality, you might start to think of like, if you're a concept artist, your artistic concepts don't just come out of your head, or at least like professional concept artists, that stuff doesn't come from their head. They're going to go look at work, before they start drawing, they're going to start looking at things that might inspire them. They might look at, oh, we want our game to be steampunk. Well, what is steampunk? You start looking at steampunk, or you start looking at, Victorian era design, such that you might, and then like machinery, such that you might then create your own steampunk stuff. You use references. You use things. You use mood boards and precedents and all these other things. They don't just come from your head. And if people do start drawing right away, it's probably because they've consumed all this stuff beforehand and they have a good mental picture of what that means. But the point is, regardless of what you think, regardless of how you think it happens, there is always research in game development. So, this is something that I do with even my commercial games. I try to, I'm making 2 commercial games right now. One is based on a comic strip, like a public domain comic strip from the early 20th century, Little Nemo in Slumberland. And I've read the comic, I've read the biography of the author, I have talked to comics scholars. I've done all of this groundwork to make sure that the product, well embodies the original thing, so that, people who aren't followers of it can be like, oh, cool video game. But people who know about it, or know of maybe like the 90s Capcom game or the 80s, movie based on it, or some, there's something that calls out to these people's nostalgia. And that gives me more ability to reach people. With my Game Boy game, it is purely for entertainment. There's not really much to talk about in terms of based on anything. The I guess main puzzle piece of the game is a plant called kudzu, which is a invasive species that just takes over stuff. So that's really what the little core mechanic is this vine you have to cut back or deal with. But even then, maybe I read a Wikipedia article about it, so I know, I came up with well, what if the flowers became bad guy? Come up with ideas for enemies, and this is in a very light way, but just reading about this plant or related plants, or what lives in or eats the plant, helped me. Oh, okay, so they're snakes. Okay, so maybe snakes live under it, so maybe there's a snake enemy and a beetle enemy. So there's lots of things that you can do. Again, this doesn't look like the very heavy-handed research you did, but it's research. So, always research when you make your games. You don't just come up with ideas from your head, because, if you try to do that, your ideas might, and this is why we did your research paper, exactly. It's not always going to be as big, but it will be a fruitful exercise. This is just this class teaches you the skill in a very on-the-nose, almost ham-fisted way. But, now the idea of what could research look like in your other games? Could it be you are going to make a transformational game, or a game based on something in the real world, and thus you do lots of research and you write the academic paper and all that other stuff, which again, for Nemo, that has been a great help for me, being able to reach multiple markets, and it will continue to be so. It certainly was with Don Quixote, with La Mancha. But, with other games, maybe it's just I just need some enemy ideas. So let me go read about creepy things, creepy crawlies that live under this weird plant. So, there's always research. And if you don't do any research, you're going to have a harder time making your game. And the ideas that you do have are going to feel a little bit weaker. They're just going to feel not as fully formed, and if you don't use references, your art is going to suck more. I'll say it, your art's going to suck more. So, research is important. And in the terms of purely transformational games, we can talk about, like I said, we'll talk about all these aspects today. So again, let me know if there are questions. But the first thing we're going to do is, who does transformational games research? So like so my son is, by the way, coming in, and he has grabbed, my wife has like a few water bottles, and he has brought all of them upstairs into where I'm giving the lecture. So imagine, like, I imagine this is going to come to a head in a few minutes. Babies are funny. Oh. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is who is doing this research, and, what does this, like, scene look like, I guess. So, the first, I think the first and most traditional is that you're going to have, like, organizations doing research. That can be nonprofits, that can be lobbying groups, that can be advocacy organizations that use seed or grant money to fund their projects, and these projects are not always made in-house. So, to give you an example of what all this means, I've worked, here are some games that I've like been producer on. We'll call it like air quotes producer. I was the teacher in classes that did some of these games, and then the students credited me as a producer. But the one on the top is a game meant for, this is one of those recidivism games. The game is meant to, like help people through their parole processes. So that was a research group at a university who was researching, this, like how to better in the criminal justice system, like help people, not go back to prison. And then the bottom is from the client was a lobbying group for the spirits industry that was trying to fight underage drinking. So it was trying to promote healthy habits through a series of mobile games. And so that's two examples. So you have a lobbying group there and an advocacy, advocacy organization or research advocacy group. And we've also worked with nonprofits before as well. So, that's the kind of stuff you would see. And you would hear, people talk about like funded research. Well, usually the way this works in games is that the organization receives some sort of grant, and a grant is a pot of money awarded to an organization by a group with money. So you might have heard of like the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Institute of Health, places like that. They have money, and they will award some of that money to people who apply for it by filling out a big, scary bunch of forms. So that money is given to them, and then they hire a game development studio. So these are not usually organizations who would make these games in-house. They would, come to a group like us at Kent State, and they might be like, well, we have this pot of money. Can you make a game for us? And we might do that. So that's how they usually, this organizational model usually works. In this model, the academic unit, so like again, if they came to us and did this, we would be working more like contractors than we would necessarily as like, not that you all would necessarily have strong opinions about this. It's almost like they would come to us and we would function as a studio rather than, on one hand, like for someone like me, that's great because then you're working on a funded thing and then your studio gets money, or, your program gets money. On the other hand, the downside is like, if somebody, like, I am rated on my research that I do, and in this case, it could be seen more as being a contractor and less as a researcher because I am not myself doing research. That's like the specifics of, research stuff that you would not need to worry about. But suffice to say, like, there's a lot of, when this happens with colleges, there's a lot of like balancing that has to happen to make sure everybody, it's like, he brought them to you as a gift, basically, that everybody, it's like mutually beneficial. So that's that. Let me know. So to give you an example, we are currently doing I would call it a transformational game, a digital art gallery for the Akron Art Museum for their Game Fest Akron event that is occurring next week. And it's basically like little tiny MMO. We've modded a open source art gallery tool called Like, and made it our own, and are putting up artwork. We're also doing a version of this for our own internal use for the KSU Animation Game Design Art Show, which I know you all got an email about. And FYI, please submit your work, and feel free to submit your games to that. I think these games that come out of this class would be excellent entries. And from what I've seen so far, there's some really good stuff. So, please enter your stuff. It's awesome. Go for it. Live your dreams. Go kick butt. But, like, those are transformational games, and we are working with an organization, but, arts are also like kind of my thing, so it works out for everybody. But this is something that we actually do have at Kent State to a degree. But okay, so let's say you do want to do this, but you're not an organization. Well, what do you do? Well, a lot of transformational games are made by individuals. Now, these transformational games do not look quite the same as the transformational games that you get from, what we just talked about with organizations. Individuals making transformational games, you could count games that are expressive or that explore some part of a human being's personal story as a transformational game. I absolutely believe in this. So, what bucket does this fit into? So, individuals, first of all, have a lot of the same goals as organizations, but usually, like 9 times out of 10, this is created for some sort of advocacy. So, I would say that several of the games that exist in this class right now would count for this type of game. So, I know we have one about exploring or like expressing what it means to be non-neuronormative. Like, okay, so that is a really good way to talk about advocacy. It is one that you could actually have like, partner then with an organization or something like that. But, this is the kind of game that you actually could see coming out of an individual. And the same thing with really like a bunch of the other ones are I don't want to like talk about a bunch and then not have the other bunch be like, hey, what about us? So I'm gonna like kind of leave it there. But to not, I hope I would not offend anybody by excluding them. So like the point being, a lot of your games would like fit into this, right? And that's really cool. So there's a light touch sometimes with transformational games where you might not realize it's fully transformational, but that's okay. Maybe your game, again, is sort of like autobiographical or personal in some way. You hear this term bandied about a lot, art game, which is a sort of like broad genre of games that express some kind of idea. And usually, again, they do not fit into the normal commercial group. But there are some ones that, are certainly like commercial-ish, but then also maybe have, like Sibel by Nina Freeman, that have some that are a little bit of both. So games in this genre tend to be short digital games, so like Sibel or Depression Quest. They store digital games, twines, or even some tabletops. And sometimes are purely autobiographical, not for a specific cause. So if you're, talking about something involving your life through a game, that can be transformational content because it's like an empathy game. You're trying to have people empathize with your situation, or but you're also, often again these are something that are made to reach a mass audience. Maybe not a mass audience in the way that like the game Hades is, like where it's an indie game that they want like everybody to go nuts over, but it's marketed to be a like typical quote unquote indie experience that's put on the typical like Steam and all those other markets. Let me know if there are questions, by the way, about these distinctions. This can get really fuzzy, and that's okay. Like the fuzziness is something that I think works for this genre, because you start to realize like you can add a little bit of this as like a spice to your game, and again that can help you reach other audiences, again like I've done in the past. Sometimes you get game studios that do this, that do transformational games, and they sometimes have similar goals to individuals making games, though their games to be far less personal. Games by studios are, as one would expect, they have higher production values than games by a single person. They might be longer. They might have cooler graphics, as we understand, like quote-unquote good graphics. FYI, graphics do not make the game. And if you think they do, you're wrong. I've had students like apologize that their videos were not 4K, and I'm like, I don't care. Is your gameplay good? Like gameplay above all, basically. But like art can, I'm not going to get into some weeds. I could get into some weeds there, but like the polygon count does not make your game better. Let's just leave it there. So some studios make games with a mission independently. So this is done by studios that specialize in educational games. So sometimes like there are independent game studios that make games with a mission. So iThrive could count as this. This is a game by Shell Games that does a lot of, they do a lot of commercial games, but a lot of their commercial games have an educational component to them. They're in Pittsburgh. And then sometimes in addition to those like internally produced commercial but educational games, they do have partnerships where they make more purely like educational or transformational games. And again, that's a way to make money. So lots of studios like your, multivarious games down in Columbus, like Way Forward, I think they're in Austin, right? Pretty sure they're in Austin. But like Way Forward, I know, has a branch that does contracting work. Friend of mine, Ben, who runs a company called Pixel Please, he's done a lot of government contracts, again, to keep his commercial part of his studio going. So this is something that game studios do this work, sometimes independently, but often as a way to make money, to keep the lights on so that they can make, again, their commercial stuff that they like. And then sometimes you have academic labs, and this is a blend of these different models, and I've talked about this. So basically at a university, you'll have, with some seed money, usually a lab is started up for games, and what that does is it funds the hiring of instructors. It allows for the creation of some classes, and then buying of equipment, and then that that group of people then puts out games with, like, brings in more money by putting out games with contracts, like I've described. So, you see things like TAG at Concordia University, the American University Game Lab, the Magic Center at Rochester Institute of Technology. But it's sort of like a blend of game studio and nonprofit organization. They make games for research organizations, which are funded by partnerships. And then the research that comes out of these are papers. So again, but they are papers about the thing they're hired to do. Sometimes you will get faculty that have their own research. And the ideal project is one as a faculty member, and again, you're not in the position to necessarily worry about this, but I am. So the ideal project for this kind of lab is one that allows you to move forward your own personal research agenda while also serving the client, but oftentimes it can be weighted more towards the client. So you kind of, again, there's a balance there. So these kind of things occur at, again, very specific types of colleges. Let me know if there are any questions. So, and then again, you have academic faculty. So this is where the class starts to get really meta, where I basically teach you about being a teacher. And we've already started to do some of this, where I talk about different teaching methods. But, welcome to learning way more about what your faculty members' actual duties are than you ever thought you would. So, let's look at what an academic faculty member does. So there are several different types of job titles that you see within this space, each with different sets of duties and priorities. So teachers typically have at least a master's degree, but that can vary by field. Our field, in our field that would become, game design. Oh boy, how to explain this one. So if I was a computer scientist, I would probably have a PhD. That is what you need to do to be a computer scientist. And in a lot of fields, that is true. Your English professors, they basically do they work their butts off for many, many years to get this title. So be nice to them. They know what they're talking about. The games field is very different in that it is new, and it's a little bit thus far been a wild west. And you get games scholarship coming from outside of game academia, or outside of games particularly. So you have maybe an English teacher who's interested, or English PhD who's interested in the storytelling in video games. So they write a lot of stuff about storytelling in video games, but that is meant to serve, get accepted into English journals or educational, an education PhD in education journals. Right now, sort of the hot thing in game studies is social sciences. So, a lot of stuff is based on games in society and things like that. Or play communities and whatnot. So a lot of those are you have stuff that is purely of the games world, and then you have stuff being written that's not of the games world but is about games. Your faculty in this program, I think we actually have a pretty good situation that I don't have a quote-unquote games degree. My degree is a Master of Architecture, which, and this is the point in which I would make the joke in the class where I could command this building to transform into a giant robot, which I can't actually. Bummer. But imagine we were all in one space and I could do that. But the point is, with games, it's this Wild West. So you either have people who are studying games but are actually housed in some other field, or you have people who are housed in games, and that's what our faculty is. We're housed in animation and games, and those can come from a ton of different backgrounds, master's or PhD. And then you also have this uncomfortable thing where, oh, look, person that has been in the industry for 20 years wants to start teaching, but they have a bachelor's degree, but they've been doing this for 20 years. What do you do? And you have to sort of like fight the norms of academia to be like, but better. But this is what we want. So, games faculty is it can vary by field, and the background can be a myriad of different things. So what you have in our program is basically people who like split their time between doing stuff in the field and have master's degrees and teach game development courses, and animation, but this is a game dev class. So then faculty are responsible for three things. We are responsible for what we do is the classroom, so teaching. And we are, so this is based on like whether that professor is tenure track or not. I am tenure track, everybody else is not tenure track. And that comes with like different things. So then they're responsible for research. So I have the biggest research requirement, which is about, I think, 30% of my duty. 60% is teaching, and then 10% is what's called service, which is like being on committees and stuff. And why this matters is, what is that research and how does it impact the teaching? And that's where, transformational games comes in, is that, creating games, you have to do so as a instructor in a way that it's going to have some sort of impact in the field. It can't always just be, I made a cool video game. I think we've lucked out in that like we can make a cool video game because I can release it as like a creative work, quote unquote. But, the best situation is if I can make a video game and then like write a paper about it. So La Mancha was great because I could made my game, sold it as a creative work, and then could write a paper about like, here's how I transformed this 400-year-old book into a piece of playable media, and here's what we saw when we had people play it. So that's what academic faculty do, and that's how transformational games fit into their job. Is it can become this thing that you then like can release as research and get research credit for. And hopefully, if you're doing this right, then be able to say, and I also released a game and had a Kickstarter, and this is what that was like. Students who need to learn that. I'm dumping a lot of information on you, so please ask questions. Okay, so real quick, I've talked about this already. Different types of positions, like if you're non-tenure track, and we here at Kent, we have term faculty, or you might hear this phrase, visiting assistant professor. That means you're not getting research credit from the university. So most of your duty is based on teaching. So, that would be other faculty, but me. Tenure track, that is when you are doing lots and lots of research. And you're so this is why my time always seems very split, is because I have a lot of research to do. And then you might hear in residence where somebody is like, there to mostly do the research work, and they might teach a class. And then you have adjuncts who are brought in to teach like a class. So I've made the joke in the past is like, you can tell how much, based on how on top of grading are, how much research or how many classes somebody has. But it is kind of true. So again, faculty in this area, all of this is to show you that faculty in this area will typically make games as part of funded projects. So like the partnership with Akron Art Museum is something that allows us to make games, and it fits within my research direction. So, that can be that could be a good like release for us. Is, you know, it kind of fits into our program's artistic goals as specializing in animation, which is an art, and game design, which is also an art, but, you know, a very like a different kind of art than people think of like classical art. You know, and then same thing where like we try to release games, or at least I try to release games that have some sort of component of other academicness, so that I can not only make a game and then tell you about the experience of making that game and how you can learn from my trials and tribulations in this, but also be able to then, you know, work with literature professors, or, you know, computer scientists, or comics scholars, or, you know, all the people I've worked with. Ask me, so before moving on, let's do the thing. Please ask me 2 questions about all of this info dump about like who does this work. Because really what this amounts to is that like these are your, I've mentioned this before, this is an alternate way to get a job in the industry. So where, you know, these are like the types of organizations you might work for. So ask me questions about that. I'm not going to move on until I get 2 questions. Oh, I like this question. What's the least favorite game you've made as part of this? Whew. That's a good one. I've alluded to projects before where, I guess without calling out a specific game, because this is going to be archived on YouTube. I think you need to find a balance between the topic area and the gameplay, as we've had in previous lectures, and when the person in charge of the project is not advocating enough for the gameplay, and is you know, it's very easy to get into a situation where what you ultimately have is a website, and if people don't understand what makes a engaging game, you know, maybe they just like, they think, we've talked about this with the chocolate covered broccoli, they think that reward, like tacking a reward system onto something, or like beeps and boops, you know, will make an engaging game. And I've had to work on certain things like that, and those are not the best. You really need somebody who can advocate for gameplay. I can tell you this one story. There was a line of games I wanted to do called Atelier games, which are the idea of the game, and I still kind of work with this as the I guess secret sauce of how I work, but I was going to do like an explicit series of games where the game was like, I would take a famous piece of art and then recreate the famous piece of art as a game, using the materials that the artist would have used. So if it was an oil painting, I would have done oil painting. If it was, a poster made of like shapes that were cut out of paper, I would do that. So I only made one of these games fully. I have some other prototypes, but I've only made one of these games. And, that game is my game Liziski's Revenge. But what made the project not be able to move forward was that there was intense pressure to work on... basically, I was in a situation where I was told at the beginning I could do my own projects, but then that was kind of like snatched up. But I wanted to continue to do my own projects because, I had kind of a research agenda to build up to eventually finding a tenure track position, which I'm in now. But the game that I was working on, I kind of had to work on, like, despite some resistance of like, well, please also work on this, and I did. But there definitely was a period where there was a lot of pushback against working on Liziski's Revenge. And then finally what happened was that the person that was pushing back, they couldn't really... I would say this was not a person that, like, really understood the what you needed to understand to make a compelling game. Their project that they were trying to push, like, get everybody to get into, and like when you have a bunch of game makers who want to make games, and you're trying to compel them to make something that's not a super engaging game, they'll kind of like flutter off into their own directions, and that definitely happened to me and some of my colleagues. We'd be like, no, I want to make this thing that I can put my name on proudly. Anyway, that person who was not a great game developer, their project fell apart. So of course, well, then what happens is that, when I only end up making one of the Atelier games, which was Liziski's Revenge, which has turned out to be a very good game, and that people, like a lot of people, have appreciated, and it's been in museums and cited by art historians and things like that. Of course, what happens is that person comes back and says, well, it's a shame you didn't keep working on that series of games. It's like, you're the one that told me I needed to stop. So I think, again, it's a, like, yeah, it's when there, it's like a, I don't know what you want to, those sort of situations where, like, the game product is a clunker. And, like, everybody's going to have it. You're going to have it. You are going to work on clunkers. Whether that be your idea of a clunker or you're hired to make a clunker, you're going to work on ones. But, the sort of, like, those situations were always, I think, very uncomfortable. So those were some of, like, the worst ones. How would you, as an individual, build their career if you're making games on your own? So how would an individual build their career if they're making games on their own? So that's a great question, because the way that I like to phrase it, especially in this program where we have a lot of people who are doing a lot of really awesome things graphically and with high-end models, because that's sort of like, a big part of the program. So there's a lot of, like, aspirational things. But you hear this one, and it's not even just from this program. I've heard this my whole career, anytime that we've had a program where people are trying to break into AAA, where people will say, well, that's cool, but, like, I'm trying to get into this, or, like, my standard is that. And it's like, here's a lesson that I want you to... Here's something I want you to understand. You may have high standards for yourself. You may consume mainly commercial AAA games, but you are as a individual, you're, like, not just a consumer anymore. So even if, like, the indie world doesn't appeal to you, you are indie until you are hired. Because, like, you're not just a consumer anymore. Like the only escape hatch to be a consumer is to like quit this program and then go get like a communicate, some other degree, right? That like to pull the ripcord. But I don't want that for you. I want you to succeed, and I want to do that thing that I usually say like in classes where we're going to be future colleagues and we're going to see each other in the hallway at GDC or something like that. Back when when we can have conferences again. Maybe we'll see each other on Zoom, but hopefully in the hallway. But like, the mindset you should understand is that you're indie until you're AAA, until you're hired by that studio. And that's okay. That's an okay thing to be. The way you build that is that you make stuff, you leverage your communities. So you go to meetups, and meetups are super easy now because they're all online. So you can go to online Cleveland game developers. You can go even to like ones in different cities. You can join the IGDA. And you can do all of these wonderful things that give you a community to work with, and that community can help see your games. You might find collaborators, but lean on those communities. And your first community is always your classmates. And here we have this wonderful club. Go to the club meetings, and there's another community of collaborators. But work with those people. Get to know people, because those people can always be the person that introduces you to the person that introduces you to the person that changes your life or gives you the big job, right? But network, make stuff, and make stuff towards what you want. Where if you do want to do high-end 3D things, maybe you work on, with a big team of people, some like nice tech demos or something like that, or like a small game with nice models, or something kind of simple, like think of Fall Guys. Fall Guys is like it's a pretty simple idea, but like it has this sustaining thing. It has this like really good hook of gameplay, but but if your goal is to more broadly make games, then you can make like lots and lots of games and put stuff out. But having that publishing experience is probably the best thing, because then like the thing that game studios, they say they want the tools, and they do, but you can also be trained in a lot of this stuff. Tools are kind of like ephemeral, they come and go. And like you're a bunch of YouTube views away from understanding Maya or ZBrush or something. But you can't. The thing that is harder to train and makes you a better candidate is soft skills, is the teamwork, the collaboration, and the ability to, I think, like it's one whole set of skills to make a game. It's another whole set of skills to launch a game. And actually get it up and functional on a website that such that like people can download it and make that game like good, such that people don't need to like call you on the phone and be like, how do I use your game? And that latter set of skills is the harder to find and the one that makes you more valuable. So building things and publishing things with a team of people is like that's the biggest thing. And then again, network, apply to things like that. How would the benefits and drawbacks in working in these particular environments? So the benefits is, here's the thing. The benefit is that, or the trick, here's what everybody assumes, is that this is some, I guess cabal of wannabes is what I get the impression that people think of this area of game making sometimes. And it's really not true. So I emailed, or I Discorded, messaged everybody in the chat for the class today saying that, bad news, meaningful play is postponed until 2022. And, one reason I really push this conference is that for this class, besides like, it being good to be part of this conference. It's cheaper than others. The city that you're going to is cheaper than others. Like if we were to go to Games for Change, that's New York City. That's very expensive. And then Serious Play has like very expensive entry fees for games, like $150 for students, which, what? So I like Meaningful Play a lot. But the trick is that if you go to Meaningful Play, or, you know, similar conferences about serious games, the trick of this is that all the same people are there. You know, there's a lot of people who in the commercial space or who juggle these different spaces, whether they be just like, you know, people who were in the industry but then have gone on to teach, or, you know, people from big industry who maybe they have some sort of aspect of their business that does educational software, like Ubisoft. We had a Disney Imagineer speak a few years ago at Meaningful Play. I say we like I had anything to do with it, but, you know, like I was there, but I didn't arrange it. But, you know, you have like these crossovers and these people from bigger companies, or at the very least, again, think about the community aspect, the people who know people. You know, I can go there and talk to contacts of mine who, you know, we all know a ton of people. But the trick is that everybody that shows up at these places also is showing up at GDC. So there's a lot of good crossover. The thing is, if you go to some of these smaller venues, like again, like a Serious Games conference, you're going to have high quality like people to talk to and network with. And that, you know, high quality in terms of like, I guess, networking ability. You know, all of these people are also amazing human beings who I'm friends with, you know, like not all of them, but mostly like the ones that I know. The ones that I don't know, but the ones that I know are amazing human beings. But, you know, just in terms of like you as a person who's networking, you will get high quality networking. And then the ability to, you know, but the venue is smaller, so, you know, it's easier to actually sustain a conversation with somebody over a period of time instead of like, oh, I got to go to this talk and then you like run off. So that's the benefit, is that like doing this, first of all, the problems are harder than being like, oh, I just want to make my fantasy role-playing game. Like the problems, or the creative problems, are harder. So it's a little more skillful in terms of design with these types of games. They, you know, but the problems being harder will benefit your non-transformational games, because then you'll be able to like, oh, I can adapt intellectual properties and things like that. Going to these events and being in this world, again, gives you more places to go, more places to network, more places to meet people. The people are the same people. They are not different people. It's like, you know, Dr. Dunlap said in the guest speech last week, you know, she alluded to the fact that, yes, they are all the same people that you would see at these companies, or at, you know, GDC and stuff like that. Trying to think, you know, again, it's, if you think about all the ways, like, how do you get the results you want on a set of dice more? You roll more dice, right? So, okay, if you're only going to, like, don't put all of your chances in one die roll, like one, you know, indie game that you want to make. Maybe you make like something kind of commercial, something kind of transformational, something kind of, you know, you try different things, but, you know, you want to see which one is going to hit. And if the transformational one hits, then, you know, it's not that you have to be transformational game maker forever. It's that, like, okay, if you win an award for a transformational game, you won an award, you still won an award. You still, like, got somebody to notice you. And if you write a paper about that, you're putting out more work. So there's more evidence of you accomplishing things in the industry, which makes you more of a name than you would be if you just kind of like sat in your basement all day and worked on just like again, derivative fantasy game or something like that. What are the drawbacks? There's not a lot. The drawbacks that I've ever encountered are the ones where it's like, okay, well, I'm working in a game context that like I don't like the game. But you'd get the same thing as like let's say you got the AAA job and you got, let's say you got a job at a studio that does commercial games. And you're like, yes, I'm so excited. Me and a friend of mine, Ben from Pixel Please that I've mentioned in the past, he and I have like, because we're both parents, we've done these like rankings of Disney Channel games that we would like in like ranking of how much we would or would not want to work on them. And like, so you could be sitting there and be like, all right, I'm ready for my first studio job. I'm going to make all my dreams have come true. Okay. And then you sit down and you're on a team, and then the producer comes and hands your team the assignment, and it's Puppy Dog Pals on the Disney Channel, on Disney Junior. And you probably don't know what that is, but it sucks. It's a terrible show. And like, just take my word for it. And you like, that's you will have to deal with that. So, the drawbacks are that you may not work on something you're in love with, but that's the drawback anywhere. Remember to make finished games and ship them. A dev at Frozen Byte said that at least 10% of the project is where 90% of the experience comes in. The best way to build up knowledge and skills. Exactly. So like, it's a different skill set, but it is where, like, this is why I am so cavalier about the tool-based part. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be, because you got the other 90% to worry about. Cliff Bleszinski once said that 90% of your game is making the game, and then the other 90% comes along, and the other 90% is shipping the game. So it's a different skill set, but it's, I think, the skill set that is more nuanced is harder, because it's like, if something is broken in Unity, there is an objective answer. If something is broken in Unreal, there's an objective answer. It's in the documentation. If something's broken in the design, meaning like the psychology of how the game works and the user experience, that's not objective. That's highly subjective. And you've got to figure it out. You've got to come up with a bunch of like subjective ideas that is a solution to this problem. And then there's a bunch of stuff related to, again, launching and all that other stuff. So, all right, I'm going to try to blow through the rest of this. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you for all the great questions, though. So I want to talk quickly about how these are released. So first of all is commercially. Many games with transformational themes are released through typical retail markets, such as Wingspan by Elizabeth Hargrave. You occasionally see games like this on Steam or other markets. We've discussed at pretty considerable length the benefits of releasing commercially. Your game is subject to the needs of transformational research, but you also have to make something that's like well crafted and good. So I'm a big believer in that, like, your game be a good game and transformational when you are making transformational games. So there's benefits of, like, if you understand how to do this. And I've told you the story about how we like got a bunch of money taken out of like the people who didn't understand good gameplay, taken out of their budget and put into our budget. That's why, like, you are better at this than other people if you know how to make good gameplay that can stand up to like traditional gameplay scrutiny. So you want to have both. And then in terms of like, if you're not at a lab, what the benefit of this is then you can have like multiple places to sell your product. So La Mancha, I can sell it in board game stores, I can sell it online, I can sell it to teachers, and I can sell it to libraries, because I know enough to work these multiple markets. So that's just like a good way to sell stuff. This doesn't fit every game, though. Sometimes organizations want games not for commercial purposes, but to play in other contexts. So, here's one of the games for the underage drink, like anti-underage drinking group, and they wanted the game to be like, they wanted, kids to download it. So it was like part of a larger program where they would work with schools, and then it would be on the app market for students to get. And when you work in these contexts, the game might have to be turned around faster. So this is part of like why some of these are not as good, is because budget and time. But so again, these are cases where you are fighting against the thing. I like to think that I've tried to push my teams to make stuff with a good gameplay component. I actually thought that these anti-underage drinking games were pretty awesome games. These ones were as well, though the client wanted, I think, a little more gamification than I normally would put. But I think we integrated it well into something that actually had gameplay. But the point is, like, sometimes your client doesn't want it to put on an app store. They want to just like be able to take it to whether it be their research group, their clients, people that they are trying to change the minds of. So like the one for the underage drinking was, I think that was App Store to be free for students for educational purposes. So that looked more like a normal release. This one against recidivism was not for commercial release at all. It was given to the client, and then they would use it as a tool in their own research. So they basically like put it in front of people and then get data. So this never saw a market or a consumer. It just saw like research subjects. And, that can be confusing for a lot of young designers. I remember talking with my students when we made this through this, and them being like, well, so was that released? Like, can I put that on my resume as like I shipped a game? And I'm like, yes, you can. So, that's shipping a game. It's just not shipping it to Steam. But you have done work for a client, and then the client received the product. Thus, the game is done and launched and shipped. Real quick. So what about publishing? How is this research distributed? So where does this end up? So one of the ways that transformational game research gets out there is, again, if you're making a game like that one with recidivism, it's not going to end up in the hands of a consumer, but people might learn about it because you then go and write a paper about it. And I know that's not everybody's favorite thing to do, but again, think about it this way. If you were on a project like this and you got your name on the paper, you could go present that paper at a meaningful play or a serious play or someplace like that. And then again, research, you are there, people will get to meet you, you will get to network, you will become a name because people would be like, oh, that person did that good thing. And you do a few of these and you start to get like a research history. Again, if that's not the sector you want to be in, think about this. I know a person who taught game development in DC. She worked on a bunch of like, kind of hokey educational games while also like doing some indie stuff on the side, but also just like, building an art portfolio. And then went off and worked at Bungie and just did amazing work. And then, it's like gone back to teaching. These are bus stops. These are stops on the train that is your career. Again, put yourself in these situations to benefit from all these mechanisms that exist. So sometimes, you do that research and you want to get it seen, so write it up. Get it published at a thing. Like, that exists. And that's why we do the practice of the paper, so that you have experienced it. It's not totally unknown territory. And if you get your paper accepted at a peer-reviewed place, then, there's proof of you being out there. So that can be helpful. real quick, let's talk about general research subjects and terms for games. I've mentioned game studies a few times. What is it? It's a field of academic inquiry around games, the act of playing them, and the cultures that surround them. The light is starting to come into the window, and I'm having a real hard time reading my notes. It's not games journalism or what you might see on IGN or Kotaku. It can be approached from lots of different directions, but the most dominant at the time of this writing, for reasons too numerous to explain, social science-based research of players and play. Some game studies people make games, but many in game studies only write about games. So you're going to get into game studies mainly if you go and be an academic, which, join us, but you don't have to. Then there's academic game development, which is where you make games as part of research. So this can and does include theory from game studies. I would call myself an academic game developer in that I have an academic job. I publish work on game development, but everything that I write is, I like to refer to it as applied theory. And part of this comes from having an architecture background. I don't love theory I can't use. That is a personal bias. That's not an actual judgment. But, I prefer to make stuff that actually has some basis in game making. But to do that, I make games and release them and then write them up. And that's kind of how I work. So, again, that's the benefit of this publishing bit. Like, I've said this before. I got recognized for my publication way before I got recognized for my game making. The thing that people I actually had a weird interaction a few weeks ago with somebody that, like, I've been posting art from some of my games on the internet, and people have been like, how long have you been an artist and animator? I'm like, this whole time. But I do level design and wrote that thing people recognize about level design. So everybody thinks I just do level design, but I also can draw and animate really well. And that's been what I've been doing the most throughout my career, but it's not the thing that got attention until now, but I had to get eyes on me to get people to recognize the art and animation stuff. So, this is why you don't shut off these like non-game making, just make pretty portfolio piece part of like what's out there. Because like you might get noticed for, maybe you come up with some argument about, user experience design in games that nobody ever thought of. And people are like, oh, you're the user experience person. And then you might secretly inside be like, but I want to be the art person. But milk the user experience attention you get until people start to say, wow, you can draw. Or, whatever it is you want to do. Okay. So, and then there's games research that isn't done by game designers or academics, but other fields. So this is where it's like medical people making games. And that's usually, again, where you get like an organization comes to a game designer, and that's the game designer in that is like a contractor. What else? We've talked about that. Okay. Oh, that's my friend Bob's game, Brukel. So that's like a good example of a game you can buy, but also has a lot of serious elements to it. So, commercial game counts as a commercial release, is actually really cool looking as a commercial release, but has like the serious transformational aspect of it actually in a commercial sense becomes a novelty of the product, and then he can go and write it up. So he's kind of like getting his cake and eating it too. This really lecture about having your cake and eating it too. And then next come conferences. So all this stuff you produce, you submit to conferences. And again, this is where you meet people. People often go to the same conferences, academic and commercial. So ones to look out for: Serious Play. Its location varies in the U.S. That's the one with the $150 entry fee. Bleh. But if you can pony up for that, you can. I have like that. That's what I got La Mancha got a bronze medal at their game conference. Games for Change is part of the Tribeca Film Festival in NYC. It's a really cool festival. Again, New York City, but definitely worth going to. Great organization. GDC Educator Summit, which is part of GDC in San Francisco. So this is the place where game educators go to talk about educating in game design. But there's a lot of people with a lot of experience that go to that and talk in it. Experience in game development. DGRA, Digital Games Research Association, varies worldwide, so does Foundation Digital Games. Those are more purely academic. And then Meaningful Play is the one that's in Michigan every year. It's the one that I really want us to submit to when it occurs again. And then festivals, same sort of thing, but you can submit games to them. Serious Play, Games for Change, and Meaningful Play. Really they are places to... What's good about submitting to these, and I realize we're way above time, but I'm trying to... One last point. The reason you submit to stuff like this, and to answer the question from before of what are the benefits, so commercial festivals are tough. And that's because you run into something that the triple indie. So, if you submit to the IGF with your cool indie game, now you all are students, so you have the benefit of being able to submit to the student competition. But if you are a small studio making your first released indie game, and it's really good, and you want to submit it to IGF, you can do that, but be prepared to be ignored because you are not already famous. And this is a criticism that has been leveraged against the IGF and against Indiecade a lot. So I'm not really saying anything outlandish about that. Plus, it's something that I've heard them even admit to themselves, because they're well, we didn't plan on being this big, so sometimes, we lean on the people we know. And that's a bummer, but, so those are really hard to get into. Your best bets, again, play the system a little bit here. Your best bets are often smaller regional things. So, things with a smaller footprint. But then the other thing, too, is that these conferences exist. And it's not they're of a different sector than you might want to get into. But again, game development awards are game development awards. And, it may not be the one that you always think of going for, but get what you can. And if you do a really good transformational game, my goodness, get the most out of it you can. Enter your game and stuff. And when these other things come along, I certainly hope you all think about entering your games, because I think they're worth it and you're going to go far with them. So, why would you not use every mechanism at your disposal to try to get yourself out there, really? So, that's why this sector is important. So, that's it. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions right now, I'm happy to answer any in Discord. Other than that, I will talk to you later. If you're in my animation theory, tomorrow, remember, no class tomorrow because I'm letting everybody have time to go vote. So if you haven't already, go vote. Go do a democracy, and enjoy. Stay sane and safe. Do self-care over the next 48 hours or so. And I will talk to everybody later.